So my session today, I'm going to talk about just a bit of a framework for dealing with COVID. Obviously, this is the elephant in the room that I can't really deliver a presentation today without looking at that, and that's going to form the basis of my narrative here. But a lot of what I'm doing here can be done at any time. So what I'm trying to do is help devise a framework, or really just communicate how we use a framework for analysing an economy or economic conditions. I'm then going to give you some trends that we're seeing in the data that's coming out, that we're producing, and also that we're sourcing from other areas. I'm going to show you where you can access these tools yourselves. You can also call us at any time if you need any help, and the council has really good people to support you as well. And then I'm just going to have a little bit of a conversation about some of the difficulties and opportunities that some of this information may present as we move forward. So I'm just about to get started. I'm going to show you a bunch of slides and charts in here. As we go, if you've got any questions, please feel free to add them into the chat, and I'll check in intermittently. If it's a real burning question, I don't mind if someone from 6 Degrees wants to go on the camera and wave me down. But I'll be checking that chat from time to time to see if you've got any questions. But I'll also check that at the end and come back and see if you've got anything. You can also email me after this. So let's start with this framework idea of analysing COVID. So in the work that we do, we like to look at your economy in 4 different stages. And as I said, anytime you're embarking on a project or looking at trying to establish a grounding of data to make decisions, looking at it with this sort of time-based framework can help. So this is sort of a more broader framework that we're just applying to COVID. So I'll just run through it quickly. Pre-COVID. So pre-COVID, before, when was pre-COVID? It sort of means different things to different people, I know. But pretty much before March, what was the economy like? What were business conditions like before all that happened? If we understand that, it gives us a much better idea about change that's happened. So we need a reference point, a baseline of foundational evidence there. Then we want to look at what the shutdown impacts have been. I'll cover off some of these in this session. So we come in, we see lockdown. What are the health impacts? What are the lockdown impacts, the quarantining impacts, and the follow through on those, what's been happening there. The recovery phase, some of us may have already began that. Sometimes it might be 2 or 3 years away. In these middle 2 phases, I can't give you a definite line, and for each decision you'll make, we'll have a different line. But trying to have an understanding of which one you're trying to profile, whether I'm profiling this is happening right now, or is this a part of a recovery, or is this part of a new phase? It is helpful to be able to distinguish between those two, because that's possibly where we might find some positive information where we can use to build onto this last phase, which is the new normal. And what is the new normal? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not a futurist, and the futurists don't really know either, just between you and I. But what we're interested in is looking at the data as it comes out to see, are we going to be going back to what we once, the lives we once led, the economies that we once had, the suppliers we once had, the customers we once had, or are we building a new customer base? Are we building new products, or how are we responding? How is the world changing? Obviously, we don't know what that is, and that's where a lot of, I think a lot of meaningful, interesting discussion comes out of these sessions that I do, is about what the future will hold. I can tell you that right now we're still in that assessing the pre-COVID, looking at the shutdown impacts and moving into its recovery phase. That's where, maybe 80% of my conversations and 95% of my work are based around that phase. That new normal, it will partly look after itself, but we're still, a ways off that. This is my view. Obviously, different parts of the country are experiencing this differently, but the way that Australia is connected nowadays, where it's a much smaller place than it ever was. I'm sitting here interstate in a major capital doing this sort of session. I'm actually from Northern Rivers, far north coast, and to think that that could have happened, 15 years ago, 5 years ago, is, was sort of a pipe dream, really. You wouldn't have even thought that you could do that. Now I'm doing business with people all over the world. So the new normal, I suppose, is upon us, but I'm mainly focused on these three phases. I'll just go back. I'm not too fussed about, when one finished and one ended, It's more about looking at sets of data to try and see which activities one's trying to support, whether that's in a local council or in a business decision. So that's sort of the chronology of it, so the time, and it tells us about where we've come from, where we are, and where we're going. And it's a really, it's a sort of story-based approach, and it really helps us sort of cement these plans in our mind, but also get support from external bodies, whether that be banks or people who are providing stimulus or support. Another way we can do that is using some other techniques, and this is another one of those. From place, things are different. Business to business, things are different. One day to the next, yes, things are changing over time, but the other factor is place, time and place. So this little section just tells you a little bit about how we go about profiling places through this COVID pandemic. I've got 5 specific topics here that will inform your specific place and potentially your role in it. So jobs. That's one of the big important things. Are jobs going up? Are jobs going down? It's not, we're seeing some places where jobs are actually increasing throughout COVID. And having an understanding of jobs in your area just gives you an idea of the overall health of your economy. There's things like GRP and output and things like that, but jobs tends to be a very good proxy for how well your economy is doing. Just because your local economy might be a declining job doesn't mean your business is necessarily doing badly, obviously, but it's a bit of a litmus test. Unemployment is often one that we use, so that's tied to jobs. We encourage people not to use unemployment throughout COVID as a measure of whether your economy is doing well or not. Right now, or the ABS about 6 weeks ago put out some data saying there were 5.6 million Australians who are getting less hours than they did. They're not being reflected in unemployment rates, but that's a third of the workforce who are potentially underemployed, who probably are a better proxy. There's lots of other data sets that can tell you about how well your economy is doing, but jobs is still one of the key factors there. Industry mix, that's where we talk about, how strong is retail in your area? How strong is health, education? Are you an agricultural reliant area? Even if you are a retailer, having an understanding of this talks to you about your local markets, your local supply chains, and the sort of place that you are for marketing and advertising. It gives you really good sense about what we would call the role and function of your place. So what's the purpose that your place is performing in an overall economic structure? That industry mix can tell you it's a very unique footprint. We look at places and we say, oh, it's either a major capital or a regional area, or it's a big city or a small town. And they're very strong and valuable typologies. But once you break it down into industry mix, you get a very sophisticated and detailed snapshot of how your place is different than others. So that's a really powerful place to come from. One, to generate business, but also to head off dangers that are coming down the line. Tourism and exports. How exposed are you to those sectors? How interested are you? How much of your revenue is derived from those? That's a really important thing now. I will tell you a hint. Tourism, in a data sense, doesn't exist. You won't find in the back end data that the ABS or that we model. You won't find tourism. It's part retail, it's part fuel, it's part transport, and it's actually made up. It's like creative industries, if you like. It's made up of other subsectors. And having an understanding of how much you rely on all these other subsectors really will tell you right now how exposed you are to COVID. We'll get to some of the reasons behind that shortly. The other one is exports. Having an understanding of how exports connected you are is really important now. When we talk about exports, we're not just talking about international exports. I think, China's almost importing as much stuff as they were before COVID. So if you tapped into the Chinese market, maybe you're doing well at the moment. That's potential. But I'm also talking about domestic exports. You might have a lot of people who live in Grafton who do their shopping because you've got a better shopping experience. You might have suddenly people who can't leave to come to Victoria on a business trip, suddenly they're coming up to Coffs and they're spending money locally. I know that's not just Coffs Harbour people in the room, but I will use that as my main example throughout this presentation. But it's really important to tap into how plugged in you are into that export sector, so that you can see, again, how exposed are you to the dangers, and then what are the new opportunities. We're hearing a lot about not being able to book places and vacancy rates of rentals being really low, and holiday accommodation. Maybe domestic transport right now, domestic travel right now is over satisfying a demand that was there that isn't now from internationals who can't arrive on our borders right now. Moving to the right there, housing and development. We expect that construction of dwellings over the next 2 quarters are going to decline. We've seen a big hit to GRP, about 10%. And Peter Brain, he heads up our modelling team. That's his real name. He is a sort of Professor Peter Brain guy. His modelling, he's very well known through treasuries all throughout Australia. Predicted a lot of the sort of meltdowns that we've seen in our lifetime. And what his evidence tells us is that when we see 10% of GRP, we can see up to 30% decline in subsequent quarters, especially in that construction sector. So housing and development, we're getting a lot of anecdotal evidence, especially from real estate agents, which is, that's part of their role, pump up the market. But at the same time, we're getting lots and lots of anecdotal evidence to say that there's been more inquiries, there's been more interest about people moving into regional Australia than we've seen historically in the last, decade. We're still yet to see that come through in any of the data. We're also, know that as some of these effects that I'll show in the next session about the economic trends, the next section, sorry, some of that might affect business confidence. That's what starts to affect some of these approvals and construction rates. Over the last couple of months, we've actually seen approvals through councils stay pretty stable. It's just starting to tail off a little bit at the moment. There have been some mortgage defaults increase in some parts of non-capital city Australia, particularly Queensland. So housing and development is going to be an interesting one. So knowing about that in your local area is going to tell you about how people are more likely to move to the area or move out of the area, how much disposable income people will have. And this is a really good proxy also when you look at approvals, because it tells you a bit of a historical comparison. How much are we approving now compared to previous years? But it also tells us about building capacity for the future. So I'd say housing, but I also include development there, because we're also talking about major projects, spending on the main street, people investing in doing up their shops. I'm in Melbourne right now, and during the lockdown, we've seen lots of businesses close. But we've also seen businesses take that up as an opportunity to borrow money when borrowing is cheap and do up their shops. They're doubling down, which obviously is a positive in this particular area. The last one here is population change. So population for the last 15 years has been the sort of the silver bullet, or I'm not really sure how to describe it, but the number one cause for our economic growth. We have imported lots of people from overseas because our birth rates haven't been enough to keep our population sustainable. You need, one kid to replace mum, one to replace dad, and 0.1 to replace accidents that happen along the way. But our birth rate's been sort of 1.8 or lower, and it's actually getting lower. So we're not even replacing what we're having. So just to keep our population rate the same, we need to bring in lots of people from overseas, and that's meant demand has gone up and lots of things have gone up. So population change has been a really important factor. that isn't happening right now. So does that mean that population is going to just completely dip? Well, probably in the short term at least. There might be some remedies of that as things move on in the future. But population and knowing about growth and decline is a really important, because that's your market. They're the people who are going to be buying your stuff. They're the people who are going to be working in your enterprises. These are the people that are going to be contributing to innovation and learning and sharing of knowledge, and they're a really important source. Hopefully, with this pause in population growth, it gives us a chance to sort of have a measured view about the pros and cons of that, and respond to that in a good way. And it's not just governments that are responsible in that space. The private sector and communities have probably, my personal view is a bigger role in that space about how to accept and to manage population change, and how to encourage it or discourage it to match a vision that we all have. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. So using some of that information that I've shown you, this is one chart for Coffs Harbour that we will come up with. So it includes some time. So that original one that I showed you a bit of a chronology about pre-COVID and post-COVID. And then also some factors about jobs and industries. So there's a bit of information here, but what we're talking about here is change in jobs as a result of COVID. Accommodation of food in Coffs Harbour is the top one, and this is saying that there are about 1,700 jobs under threat from COVID. We've actually revised this data since. This is really just to give you an idea about the sorts of stories that we're telling, but though it hasn't been revised that much for Coffs, I should say. About 1,700 jobs under threat because of COVID in accommodation and food. The orange portion is JobKeeper. So these people are not, this isn't everyone that's getting JobKeeper. These are basically 1,000 people in accommodation food who are on zero productivity. What does that mean? You know, people who are getting the JobKeeper, but they're not necessarily going to work and delivering. So that business can keep that job open. The grey component are people losing their jobs. So what's that? That's another, you know, so we had 1,000 here, another 700 of people actually losing their job, 1,000 on JobKeeper. So what this story is telling us is that if we break it down by industry and we look at change over time, in reference to COVID, we're losing about 1,700 accommodation and food. 700 jobs we're losing, and there's another 1,000 that are direct threat. So if JobKeeper stops tomorrow, those jobs could potentially not be there. Healthcare at the other end has seen an increase. So about 400 jobs. We're seeing that a lot to do with, it's not so much with health staff, but mainly with cleaning contractors and maybe some professional service advice. I've just had a question come through about, do we have much data on remote work statistics and trends, people maintaining their employment, relocating to an area such as Coffs, for example? We don't have it at hand. Remote working, I'm not sure if you're referring there to people working from home. I do see you're talking about people relocating. The relocation data, there is a lag in that. The good news is that only, it's less than a year away, we're doing a census, and that will give us very specific details about this. So the census will be able to tell us, and we can look at this right now for 2016, but because, you know, of COVID, it's going to, the one in 10 months is going to be very important. We can tell you by suburb, people's occupations, incomes, all that population characteristics, where they used to live in 2016 and where they live in 2021. So right now, we can't tell you that, but in a very, you know, what I would call a short amount of time, we'll be able to give you some bit more meaningful information on that. That said, you know, there are other means of doing that. So survey work can be really important, and we encourage also all businesses right now that are over the business. And I was just in Coffs, you know, and saw tell about 2 months ago. I was up in New South Wales. I was the lucky one. I did, you know, the businesses are open and things are, you know, doing what I would say quite well at the moment. Obviously, that's a relative, and business by business, there's things are different. But I encourage you all to talk to the people in your business and profile them. Profiling is a good thing in my business, where people come in and you Hi, oh, how old are you? Where have you come from? What do you do for a living? All these things give you intel that you can use in conjunction with this quantifiable data that I'm giving you access to. It all tells part of that story. And I think right today, if you want some intel right now about relocations, that's probably your best bet. So that's a bit of a framework, looking at time and looking at some specific characteristics. And there's 5 there that I've given you, but that's certainly not the be all and end all of those characteristics. There's many that are going to be relevant. There's one that I didn't put on there, which is probably age. Knowing the age of your customers and the age of the place in which you operate can be a really powerful way to sort of profile your customer base as well, and to also communicate with other entities that might have the potential to give you support. So now I'm just going to look at some trends as we're seeing them. So I've already mentioned that fallout in the construction sector. Here's Peter Brain's quote: when GDP falls 10% for any quarter, the expected fall in business investment in the current quarter and the 2 subsequent quarters is 30%. So, Peter's unequivocal there. This is, he's very confident in that. So we take heed of that. Obviously, local conditions will, sometimes it's 30, a bit less, a bit more, who knows? But we can help you with that. The second thing is falling global demand for our goods and services. Now, that will have an impact if you're a direct exporter, but Australia has a strong export connection in a lot of its sectors. So whether you're direct or indirect, it's likely to have an impact on you. And I've already mentioned that population tap being turned off. So how are we going to deal with growth moving forward? So let's pull that apart a bit more. Here's some modelling that we've done in conjunction with our friend Peter Brain to look at what the recovery looks like. So we've heard things about a snapback or a V recovery or all of these sorts of things. And this is sort of what this chart here that we're looking at is our version of that, but this is what they're talking about. What's the shape of the line of recovery? And this is for Australia, and we can see that we're up to where that horizontal, grey line is. Employment has been hit hard by social distancing. It wasn't actually the actual health impacts of deaths and hospitalizations and those sorts of things that have had the biggest impact. And again, I forgive me for I'm talking about the economic impact here, not so much about the personal experience. I know obviously there's personal experience that way outweighs some of these economic impacts. But the social distancing has had an immediate and significant impact on Australia's economy. So this orange line falls off a cliff because of this 0.1. This is sort of historic data at this stage because we're around this S, we're between this S and this D right now. So what the Commonwealth government were hoping was that it would dip and then we'd just see the line recover, come up here. But what we're seeing is that, yes, it's probably going to recover stronger than we thought it was going to. The good news is that JobKeeper is working very well. It's working very well. And it has been good to keep businesses afloat, but it's also been good to get some disposable income throughout the economy. It's also been good as a baseline social safety net. There's a lot more work that can be done, but credit where credit's due. That's been a very successful campaign. We've seen it lead into businesses retaining staff beyond anything what they could have imagined without it. That's a fact. Unfortunately, it will come to an end at some stage. Right now, this stage 3 is modelling when we're told that JobKeeper comes to an end and some other stimulus packages. There's other things modelled in that. It's not just JobKeeper, but that has a significant role. So what that means is that if JobKeeper gets extended, we can expect that this peak here is likely to be extended. And what we imagine, we don't know, we don't have a lot of intel on this, but what we imagine is that there's a lot of work going on. So if we move that number 3 left and right, if the Commonwealth government moved the stimulus left and right, how does that affect how far that trough dips at that point? So, we're calling this like a W recovery. There's a few other factors. There's that construction stuff. But what we don't know is what's the impact of this sort of W effect on the long-term structure of our economy. So what happens to supply chains in the meantime? What happens to businesses that leave the economy, that they're not just sitting there dormant waiting to re-enter? What happens to work when a big lot of workers enter the unemployment or looking for work category? These are some of the things that we're always challenging, and we're always knocking on the doors of our clients and asking them for answers, and also helping them work on the answers. We're always looking at state governments and Commonwealth governments, and it's not even trying to keep them accountable, but we just want to be aware of the latest information so that we can then feed that through to businesses like yourselves and to local authorities and to state authorities and into our model, so we can try and help at the local level respond to these things. So this is across Australia. We're seeing this W, and right now this is very fresh information, but I'm just going to pull apart some of these at a bit more deeper level. But before I do that, I just wanted to point out that initially the job impacts were in the regional areas, but it's starting to have a bit of a shift as we move into this next phase. We're seeing that our modelling is showing that a lot of the regional areas aren't, as a percentage, as reliant as on tourism as some of the major capitals and some of the capital city LGAs, local government areas. So there's this interesting thing. Regional areas were hard hit, but maybe they didn't trough out as badly, or maybe they have recovered more quickly because they have. If I go back to the Coffs Harbour example, sometimes this sort of industry mix may be more resilient. This is an interesting thing. I go back to here. In regional Australia, we saw the comparing metro and regional. We saw metro sort of take off. Populations move from regions into metros. Job growth happened in metros. Investment happened in metros, and obviously we're all concerned about that. We're trying to find ways to boost the regional economies. But what's happened in the meantime is a lot of the sort of legacy industries like ag, manufacturing, domestic tourism, and old-fashioned day trips, if you like, from local shopping and things like that, that's still in the regions. And that's the stuff that has proven to be a little bit more resilient. I haven't done any specific research on that specific topic. I'm just correlating that with these figures, but I'd be keen to do some of that in the not too distant future. So just pulling apart some of these 1, 2, 3, and 4, social distancing, investment, and the longer run. Social distancing, the economic impacts in the short term, particularly, we're seeing business closures, some constraints from people not being able to trade. And the border closures, they do have very real and immediate impacts. We understand that. It's mainly being felt in food and accommodation and arts and recreation. When I say mainly, I'm talking about in size of jobs lost and people who are needing JobKeeper, and percentage. So a lot of art, there's not necessarily a lot of arts and rec jobs in terms of the quantum, the count, the head count, but in many areas, up to 70 to 90% of jobs are being lost in that space. When we say art and recreation, we're talking performing arts, we're talking gaming, we're talking sports and rec. All of those are really being affected, and food and accommodation. And that's got a lot to do with the fact that they're reliant on footfall. If everyone has to stay home, if everyone has to stay a certain distance, if you're reducing the number of people in there, in your premises, obviously, if you're relying on those things, you're going to have a bigger impact. So social distancing, we know that there are impacts across all sectors, but those ones are most heavily hit. And what that flows through to the economy. So once those businesses are hit, we see falling investment and spending generally down, and we're seeing a bit of that. So economically, we're seeing unemployment rise a bit, but I've already mentioned there has been a little bit of an uptick in unemployment. To be honest, what we call the SA4, the regional area between Coffs and Grafton is one of the most significantly affected by negative unemployment figures, it's actually quite difficult to distinguish between Coffs and Grafton in the baseline data. That's just an FYI for you. I'm a data nerd, just maybe that was that coming out of me. Household spending is down. Potentially that means household saving is up. That's on a place-by-place basis. In Queensland, we're seeing a few, mortgage defaults increase. Business investment being down. We've seen residential housing approvals stay about the same rates. I'm not sure I can say the same for commercial approvals. Export demand is down and population is down. I've covered off some of those. I'm just seeing, I saw a chat come up, but it disappeared. Industry impacts in this, so as the effect of falling investment and spending, this is where we start to see construction decline. Business services, things like professional services, with falling investment, a lot of those advice-based businesses or accountants or architects, or a lot of those start to feel the pinch. International education is down. Anywhere with universities or tertiary education will be affected by that. Discretionary retail and exports, manufacturing, ag will be affected. But this is, again, why it's important to know about your export market, because not all export markets are equal. Not all manufacturing is equal. Not all places are equal. So what we're seeing is anywhere that's been drought affected, this is now a double hit, and bushfire affected. We did one of these in Bega Valley, and it's shocking what they've had to endure over the last 12 months. But metros are also being very, very hard hit, as we've seen in that previous slide. This is some of the trends that we're seeing. So I'm just going to take a step out now to show you where we're accessing some of this data so you can access it yourselves. So these tools are essentially what we provide to council, but a lot of the data in there is our own. A lot of it we source from externally, and it's all free and available for you all to use. Council conducts sessions from time to time where we, do direct consultation with businesses and business groups, and I'm happy to do those. I deliver those from time to time. These tools are a way for the local council to deliver data that's a shared resource. Why is that important? It means that you don't have to argue with council about numbers. You don't have to, they can support you and show you what some of these numbers mean. And it means they're easily accessible so that you can just get on there and point and click and get information into your businesses so that you can make evidence-based decisions. There's no one better place to know about your business than yourselves. I accept that. I've got a retail background, not just training businesses, but being involved in supporting them and starting them up and running them and nurturing businesses. And my belief is nothing, and just like communities are best served by people within them, just like businesses. Also, they're best served by having decisions that are based on data. What I think is about 80% of what you do is sort of, everything we do on gut feel. About 80% of the time you'll be right, and this evidence can prove to you that you're right. Then about 20% of the time you're wrong. It might be more for you. You might be a whiz, and 95% of the time you're right. Maybe you're 60% right. It doesn't really matter. When you're right, you want evidence to be able to prove that you're right, to confirm that for your own enterprise, but also when you're dealing with external businesses and like banks and things like that. But also you want to know when you're not right. And that can be one of the hardest challenges. It's not finding all this data. The biggest challenge is when you need to change your mind and accept, you know what? I've been telling myself that in my suburb, I have old people. So I've been putting, I shouldn't say older, but older people, because what is old? Older people. So what I've done is I've put lots of things on my shelves to serve that community. It's not until you get into the data we go, well, actually, hang on, my biggest growth area has been young families. And so that's where it's not rocket science, literally, it's not, where we're trying to make it very simple, and it's just point and click. So Profile and Atlas, which is the red and yellow icon here, are about the community. That's residential data about people that live in the area, and it looks at different local government areas and drills down into suburbs. And the atlas actually even drills down into 400 households. And I'll demo these in a second. But you're able to get hundreds of characteristics down to 400 households. It's very awesome data, just with a point and click. Forecast ID is a bit more technical, and that gives a 25-year forecast of what the population will look like. Obviously, with COVID, there's a lot of, our modelling team in that space have had to do a lot of work to look at what is impacting things like this modelling. And then lastly, economy ID, and I work in this last team, if you like. We all sort of use all of the tools, but this is the team that I'm from. This looks at jobs and industry locally. And interestingly, there's not many sources where you can look at local jobs on an annual basis. So I just sort of chat there. So I'm just going to keep moving through. So here's a link to Coffs Harbours, and any area you can put in there. But I'm just going to stop sharing for a second. Hello. And I'm going to jump on and just show you quickly where these things are. If I click on that, so I just need to share again. I'm getting used to the uncomfortable silences that happen when you share these things, but there we go. I'm just trying to put it. There we go. So when you click on there, it'll come to this page. And we see 1, 2, 3, 4. These buttons take you to the tools. And anyone who's interested in using data, this is the page I recommend that you favourite, whatever browser you use, chuck it in there. You can also Google, you can go through the council website. I won't go through that today. But click on community profile. This is what the site looks like. This is not a training session for these tools. Like I said, I'm happy to deliver those at a later date. This is what they look like. 1, 2, 3, 4, they're the 4 tools I described, the residential stuff, the forecast and the economic data. And essentially what you can do, again, this is not a training session, I'm just going to give you an example. I can go here, how old are we? Click 5-year age groups, scroll down, and this is telling me the age of Coffs. You're seeing sort of a bulge in 55 to 65-year-olds and, primary school kids. How is that changing over time? Well, it's actually our retirement age we saw the most growth in. I know I'm going quickly, but hopefully that makes sense. I can then go to this drop down and I can choose an area. So Sawtell, I can see that the shape of that is about this. I can compare Sawtell and the whole of the council area, or I can compare to another suburb. Let's look at Sawtell compared to Coffs Harbour Central. Not a lot older, but an older age profile. So we're seeing more people in these 44 to 69-year-olds, less of the sort of what I would call the frail elderly, a bit more of this primary. Is there a good primary school out there? Maybe the housing accommodates these sorts of families. Interesting, there's a spike here and there's a spike here. So maybe there's a bunch of 40 to 44-year-olds with 5 and 9-year-olds. That's me. I'm in that category. Maybe I'll move to Sawtell. So there's worse places to live, isn't there? They tell me that's not old to have a 6-year-old. I'm going to believe them. But we see still, even though we do have some of those younger families growing here, we're seeing growth in these. Yeah, anyway, this is not a training session, so I encourage you to get on and have a browse around. But this is interesting here. Social Atlas. I've just clicked on the title there and it brings it up. And here's a map. I'm not sure, it's hard because Zoom, everyone can set their screen up differently, but I'm just directing your eyeballs to the top left-hand corner. Forget the map for a second. There's a drop-down menu and you can look at population, age structure. If I'm a business that cares about 18 to 24-year-olds, where are they? Households, lone person households, people that walk to work, labourers, professionals, high density, medium density. Let's pick one. My business caters to 18 to 24-year-olds. So I can then now go back to this map. This is the one that I was talking about with 400 households. I'm zooming in. Oh. And this is telling me, if I click on these, I can create my own little catchments. Not only am I looking at all the Coffs, there's 56 18 to 24-year-olds in that one little small area. There's 45 here. There's 10 here. So I'm going to stop sharing again. That's the whirlwind, very short version, just to show that these tools exist. And you can get hundreds of characteristics down to very small, what we call geographies or areas, to inform your business. So I would encourage you to look at the state, look at the region, look at the LGA, look at the suburb, and then look at these very small areas, because you can do some very sophisticated marketing with this. You can say, I've segmented that I want young people who have a high income. Everyone wants young people with high income. But pick as many as you like, and you can literally find where they are here, how it's changing over time. You can see whether they're a good one to choose or otherwise. I'm just going to quickly go back now to my slideshow. I haven't got too much longer to go. So this is just a quick conversation about the long run challenges and opportunities that we're seeing in the data. So the question marks are the ones where I tell you I don't know the answer. That's sort of what's the new normal? We don't really know. So structural change. So what's the relationship of business to government going to be like? What's our relationship with other countries going to be like? Structural change is as big as it sounds, and we don't know what's going to happen there. And I think that my particular interests are going to be around either structural change. When I say interest, like if I do some more research, sort of in an academic sense, around structural change. The other one is around maybe household expenditure, the impacts that's having at the moment. We don't know exactly how that's going to go, even though we are seeing some savings up in some areas. Youth disengagement. These impacts, especially in your area, have affected women and young people in a much more significant way than the rest of the economy. So what's the long-term effect of that? Your job seeker rates are quite high. You can find that on the data tools. Export competitiveness, well, that's all changing, and people that are ready to market might have an advantage there. Tourism markets disrupted. I would suggest that, we know, things like Byron and Cairns are busy at the moment, so there's no reason why your area can't tap into that, your whole region can't tap into that same domestic market. I think supply chains and local supply chains are where we need to be probably very conscious, because once they go, they can be very hard to establish. So right now, think about where you get everything from. Think about how long they're going to be sustainable for, and try and support them where possible. I know that's difficult because we're all in our own businesses and we see through our own eyeballs, but it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, one of these, your supply chain, isn't it? Because they help you get your goods to market. And that's not just in retail and manufacturing. We're also talking in virtual environments and all sorts of ways. Retail, education, and finance are going to continue to be hard hit because of those social distancing and those business confidence measures. We're not out of the woods yet. And until we get a vaccine, I'm telling you the same story you're probably going to hear from everyone. So I won't go on about that. But office markets, I'm not sure how much A-grade space. I would think that there's probably a potential to repurpose some space in your region, and maybe that's a business opportunity. But there will be people wanting to move to the regions to work from home. But also, we know that no one wants to just I wouldn't say no one. It's not as simple as just everyone now working from home and just passing that overhead onto households. People still want to communicate. They want to co-locate. They want to share ideas. So what are you doing about that? Are you tapping into that? Are you communicating with other people, learning in those environments yourselves? Local manufacturing, let's hope through that there is a reversal of fortune and we start to see that go through. I think anecdotally, I'm seeing some of that. I haven't seen it in the data yet. Online shopping, obviously, I hope you're all mobilised. Help is out there. Whoever in this forum is offering online readiness for shopping, get on board. Don't don't just, if you're a retailer, just tune in. I don't know, I'm not advocating any of those ideas, but listen, because that's going to be very important. And high quality food, as sort of international supply chains have become less certain, local food supply, and there's plenty of that coming out of your region. Whatever you can do to tap into it. I mean, look at like Bangalore pork and all this sort of stuff. I saw a clothing chain that was tapping into that branding. It doesn't have to be direct. Share that, become a community of a brand community, if you like. I'm just spitballing now, obviously, but we work very directly on many ideas in these exact same areas. So they're not just, I'm not just pulling them out of nowhere. They're very real things that can help. What's uncertain is, what are the skills of the future? How to be entrepreneurial here is a challenge, but we're finding those that are positive and are looking for new ideas are tending to be the success stories here. Not everyone will succeed through this. I mean, eventually, hopefully, as a society, we can help everyone get back on track. But I really encourage you to have that entrepreneurial spirit. The only other thing here that I think is the most important is there are going to be social welfare issues. So whatever you can do as businesses to keep an eye on that, to be part of that community are your customers. They sort of directly, support your business there. But I personally think that, it's all, part of a wider responsibility that we all have as business people, as professionals, as people who are thinking of these things, to consider what impact we're having on our wider community. That's my contact details. Feel free to contact me anytime. I'll make this available. I think we're recording this, so this will be shared, but ryan@id.com. What do they say? The only dumb questions are the ones that aren't asked. I'm not sure I entirely agree with that, but ask them anyway, because I'm here. I love dumb questions, but even the difficult questions. We saw some things on the news about data, and we just want some resolution. Happy to answer any of those sorts of questions. So